Welcome to the Teachers Talkin' podcast, hosted by Dustin and Ghazali Abdul Wahab. In this podcast, we discuss all things education and teaching, from innovative teaching methods to challenges to strategies and much, much more. In this discussion or roundtable-based podcast, we bring in educators from all around the world to talk about a variety of education topics so that we can support as many teachers as possible. We want this to be a place of inspiration, personal and professional development, and simply a place where we can elevate education together. Welcome to Teachers Talkin'. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 13 of Teachers Talkin'. I am Dustin, as always, here with my co-host Ghazali. And tonight we are absolutely thrilled to welcome our guest, Toni Rose, who is going to bring us just a wealth of information, as she is the host of another podcast called the Modern Classrooms Podcast. And we tonight are going to talk today in this podcast. We're going to talk all about the Modern Classrooms Project and self-pacing. So the title of this episode is Breaking the Mold, Embracing Self-Paced Learning with the Modern Classrooms Project. And we're going to focus on the overarching question, how can a self-pacing model support teachers and students in finding more success than the traditional method of teaching? So before we get started, Toni Rose, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in education and, kind of the roles you've done, where you've worked, where you're at, all that good stuff?
Oh my gosh, I could go all day about this. And also that focus question, that's going to be a hefty and a beautiful one. So I'm really excited to dive into that. So y'all, hey, I'm Toni Rose. I am the community engagement for, I do a lot of community engagement for Modern Classrooms Project. So what that means is I basically hype educators up and I elevate them and I celebrate all of their successes. And then I empower them to create really a more human-centered learning environment, right? So that our students can access the learning anywhere and everywhere. And then also creating an inclusive space so that students can show up as they are, whatever that may mean, right? And so just a little bit about me. I was in education. I was a former educator, middle school English teacher for 10 years. I taught in Atlanta, Baltimore City, Washington, D.C., and then I was an instructional coach in Washington State. So I absolutely love anything and everything that deals with English. And it's really funny because my students, I'm an immigrant, I'm Filipino, and I'm an immigrant, and English is not my first language. And so it's really funny when I mispronounce words or I just ramble with my words, and my students are like, Ms. D, how are you an English teacher? And also working with middle schoolers, it really gave me thick skin, right? It's a very humbling experience. Every single hour or maybe even every single minute of the day, they have something to say to humble you. And I absolutely love that. So I always say that my students made me the person I am now because of just their comments and their actions and the way they move in this world. And so I also taught adult ESL at night. So for the longest time, my whole identity was being an educator. And that was something that I was just really proud and passionate about. And then I quickly realized the last 2 or 3 years that I really needed to focus on me as a human being. Who am I outside of the classroom? Who am I outside of education? And so that's been a really fun journey for me also to figure out who I am as an individual, because all I can tell people is that I'm a teacher. And I like hanging out with students and I like partying with teachers. And I needed to just kind of expand on that, right? And so I think I implemented the model my 10th year of teaching. And it was also the time that COVID hit. So it was 2019, 2020. And when I tell you that our learning continued, the transition from being in school to virtual space was seamless because my students already knew how to access all of the resources, how to learn on their own. They've really disrupted the learned helplessness that they had prior to coming into my classroom. And so my students really engaged and loved and continued to learn amidst the terror and all of the things that were happening with COVID during that year. And so after that, Modern Classroom invited me in to become a mentor, and I was able to mentor like 25 English teachers from all over the world the year after. And it was overwhelming at first, but then I really found joy in being able to help English teachers create a space for their students to thrive when things are just on fire, right? And so that's just a little bit about me. But also outside of education now, I've realized, Dustin and Ghazali, I love roller skating, I love yoga, I love hanging out with my dogs. I'm training for a half marathon. I love to eat, and I really love chai lattes. That's something new. And Ghazali, you were talking about drinking ginger beer. I absolutely love ginger beer. So it's really exciting to learn all of these things about me. And I wish that I could be cheersing you with my own ginger beer. So thank you for inviting me in this platform to share a little bit about my experiences and my expertise, Dustin and Ghazali.
Wow, that's actually a lot of things that you are already doing. And you're a teacher, you say? I don't know many teachers who can do half the things that you are already doing right now. Rollerblading, training for a half marathon. Eating is what we do best, yes. Eat a lot. We do. Sometimes it's, comfort food. Yeah, but it's really nice to see that you have such a well-balanced lifestyle. That's something we're trying to achieve here where I am.
Yep.
And also, I think I can engage with what you're saying about, the online learning. When COVID hit, wow, that was easily one of the worst times in my life as a teacher, because suddenly I had to change my mode of teaching, and I couldn't really adjust as fast as other people, which is why I think is the reason why I went into AI, because I saw that we're gonna go blended after this. Might as well jump on board. So I'm really interested to know more about this self-pacing, because frankly, this is the first time I'm hearing about it. So what is the Modern Classrooms project, and how does it redefine the traditional classroom, model pedagogy? Yeah, what is it actually? Tell us about it. I'm so curious
Oh,
to know.
Ghazali, I'm about to just blow up your mind, just
Yeah.
expand your brain. So I hope you're ready. So Modern Classrooms Project is a nonprofit organization where majority of my team are actually former educators. And so our two co-founders taught at a high school in DC, and they really just saw that there was a lot of gaps in the learning that's happening. And so they wanted to create an instructional model where students can come in regardless of what their levels are, regardless of what's happening outside of the school, if they're absent for a couple of days because life is lifing, right? Like that there's a way for students to still catch up, to still get that learning that's happening. And so when you think about in education, we're thrown a lot of words, right? As educators, we're thrown like, hey, we're going to differentiate. We're going to personalize. We're going to do blended learning. We're going to do self-paced. We're going to do mastery-based. So those three pillars for Modern Classroom, our teachers know what they mean. Now, us as an organization, what we do is show you how to do it. Right? Because when I was teaching, I could tell you what all of those meant, and I could show you examples because I've read up on it. I've listened to podcasts about it. But then you tell me that I need to do it. I'll be like, but how? It's the application part, because sometimes we can read things all the time, right? We can talk to people, but then like actually implementing something is really difficult. And so Modern Classrooms created this instructional model to really, again, like redefine, or even in my words, disrupt this traditional classroom model. Because when we're thinking about traditional classroom model, that's when folks are lecturing, right? Like I was lecturing at my students 20 to 25 minutes a day every time we come into class. And then I expected for those students to sit still, especially in middle school, right? To sit still, listen to me talk, and then just hope Just hope that you got everything I said that first time. And if you were absent, you weren't there, oh, well, that sucks. You just lost that lesson, right? And so what happens now with modern classroom is that we're disrupting that. Lectures I've seen don't work for a lot of people. And I know as English teachers, we love to talk. I will tell you stories all day long and then forget about the standard and the objective that I'm teaching because I've just told you this story that was really cool. And so with the Modern Classrooms project, right, it really helped me to be more intentional with the time that I'm spending with kids. So for example, we have 50 minutes, right? Those 50 minutes, when I implemented the model itself, my students learned for 10, 15 minutes on their own, meaning that they have this instructional video that they're watching that I created, and students are watching it on their own time. So if you think about students with IEPs, students who are learning the language, they can pause, they can process, they could do what they need to do to learn whatever it is that they need to learn, right? And so this is where like self-pacing comes in, and this is where modern classrooms come in too. I also just want to highlight that like we have a large community of educators who are constantly sharing their resources for free. And so like I highly recommend jumping in the community, even if you haven't taken our free course, if you haven't taken our virtual mentorship program, it's also okay. Just jump into our Facebook group if you're on Facebook and just like start reading what folks are writing. And you'll be like, wow, this is really inspiring. And it's so real because our community, they don't hold back. They just say like, hey, this worked for me. Or they say like, this didn't work for me. That was actually trash. How can I make it better? And there's just this community of support, because something that I say all the time too in our podcast is that you want a community. When you're trying to dismantle something that has been like that for years and years and years, it's going to be really difficult to do it on your own. But when you have a thought partner and you have a community to help you and to support you and to lift you up whenever you need it, then that makes it that much more fun and that much better and that much more sustainable. So Ghazali, I kind of went everywhere with that question, but I hope you kind of have an understanding of what we do.
Yes. Yeah, I hear you. You have a community. How big is this community actually?
Yeah, so in our Facebook group, we have about 18,000 educators from all over the world. Yeah.
Wow.
It's really dope. Like our free course, we have 63,000 teachers from all over the world who have taken our free course.
Wow.
And yeah, so it just like continues to grow. And Modern Classrooms is really good at also listening to teachers. So if they say like, hey, I need this resource, or I'm thinking about creating this resource, do you already have it? And we probably already do. And all of our resources are free, which is also amazing, right? Because we love some free stuff. We're not paying for anything.
Yeah. We're teachers. We're poor teachers. We don't pay for stuff. Right?
We are poor teachers. Exactly.
Yeah. Is membership free? How do you subscribe through Facebook?
Yeah, it's all free. So, and we'll share, of course, links as well, right, Dustin? So if you go onto our free course, which is just learn.modernclassrooms.org, you'll get more information, or just really go through the modules. We have 3 different modules that really highlight what does self-pacing look like, what does mastery base look like, feel like, sound like, and then you also get teacher voices there as well. So if you click on, particular resources, you'll hear from teachers all over the world just saying like, hey, this is how I implement self-pacing in my classroom, or this is how I motivate students, or this is how I introduce Modern Classroom. So again, like our community is just so ready and prepared to support you in however you want. So, and even if you're like, I don't actually have the capacity to do the free course right now, that's also okay. Like jump into our Facebook group, or start listening to our podcast. And then you'll be like, oh, okay, I have a better sense now of how I can do the things that are being talked about.
Yep. Any people from Singapore?
We do actually have one. We have one member that I like really got close with in Singapore. So I'm sure we have a lot more, but there's one who's like very vocal. And you know what? Thank you. I'm going to check in with him actually and see how he's doing, because it's been a while since we've talked.
Ah, interesting.
So, Toni Rose, you kind of started talking a little bit about how this model impacts students, but tell us a little bit more about how a self-pacing model like this one benefits students in terms of learning outcomes, engagement, and ownership of learning?
Okay. Oh my gosh. I mean, the real question really is like, how does it not help? um, and so when you think about learning outcomes, right, with self-pacing, because I think sometimes too that there's a lot of misconceptions about self-pacing, where if we create a self-paced environment, we just let our students go and there's no structure, right? It's just kind of like, okay, good luck. Hope you have fun. When in reality, there's a lot more structure, because I don't know about y'all. When I was teaching, I would come into school and be like, what am I teaching today? Oh, seems like it's a figurative language day today. So I'm going to do that. And, and so sometimes, and that's reality for a lot of teachers, right? Where they just kind of come in and figure out like what they're teaching for that day, because they haven't had the time and capacity and the energy to figure it out beforehand. But with self-pacing, what happens is that it's now a clearer pathway for both teachers and for both educators and students to actually know where you're going, what the final destination is. So when it comes to self-pacing, right, you already have your learning outcomes. You already thought about what kind of engagement you want to include in those learning outcomes, and as well as like learning tasks. And then like, when it comes to self-pacing, there's got to be ownership of learning, right? Because you can't really actually like, what's the word? Like, you can't still hold on to your kids with self-pacing, right? There's a lot of like letting go. So you're relinquishing control. And I think sometimes it's really scary for teachers.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to self-pacing, teachers have to be a lot more intentional. Hey, how many units am I going to have or how many lessons am I going to have for this unit? What is the summative assessment that I need for my students to achieve and to master? And how can I chunk that in smaller pieces so that our students can actually understand and learn and have time to make revisions and reassess so that they can fully master a concept that they're learning, right? So Ghazali, you were talking about how you had a large class of 40 students, right? And you're like, oh, English is the worst because you have essays to grade. And when I tell you, before this model, I was that teacher who would have those essays on my desk, and I will continue to look at them until I feel the need or the desire to grade them. And I would also just like kind of poke fun too and invite my friends over for a grading party, because then that would motivate me to like grade these essays, right? And then so it would take me like 2 weeks to a month to give it back to the students, because again, that's a lot of reading for me as an educator, right?
Mhm.
And then sometimes I get bored, sometimes I'm not paying attention to what I'm reading, right? And so self-pacing is really best for me as an educator as well, because then I can chunk it. So when I implemented this model for my own classroom, I knew that my students needed to write an essay. So then how could I chunk that in a way that like, I'm not reading everybody's full essay on that one day, but I'm reading it throughout the unit that we have. So for example, if they wrote a narrative essay, right? If we want them to write a narrative essay, hey, my first task was just write it out. Tell me, I want to see your skills, right? So then they write out this narrative essay, and then throughout the unit, like for lesson 1, let's talk about introduction. How do we create an opening scene in a narrative essay? So then they learn about that, and then their mastery check is to go back to their writing and implement what they just learned. So then my students are just not like, they're not seeing their paper, they're not writing it that one time and never working on it ever again, right? So throughout the unit, the students are going back to their writing and making it better. Because honestly, that's what writing is, right? Our first time of writing something is going to be trash. It's going to be trash. No matter how much we want it to be perfect, it's not going to be.
Mhm.
And I think when I was teaching prior to implementing the model, that was what I was expecting of my students. You write it out that one time and it better be good. And then like, I'll give it back to you with feedback, and then you revise it on your own time. Sorry, we don't have time to revise. We don't have time to reassess. You do it on your own time. And majority of the time, my students never revised or reassessed, because they have other things to do outside of my class, right? If we think about it, like our students have 7 to 10 classes outside of your own class. So really, that it was just unrealistic. So with this model with self-pacing, it was just kind of like, okay, I'm going to break this narrative essay down, and then we're going to keep going back to your writing. So by the end of it, I already know what all of my students wrote because I was also reading it as they were writing different parts. And I know a question that I often get asked too is like, oh, well, if they're revising their essay, how do you know what they've added? Then that means that you're just going to be scanning. Well, here's a fun little tip that I learned is that you get students to highlight what they added. So then you know for a fact, like, oh, I'm going to look at that. But it's also a skill for the student, right? Because then they know that they have to identify it. Not only are they creating it, but they also have to identify what they've changed. So again, that's like that revision of being aware of what they've revised and then highlighting. So I always tell my students, hey, if you don't highlight it, I don't know what I'm looking at. So I need you to highlight the changes that you've implemented so that I know, oh, here it is. These are all the changes. And then I can give you the feedback on the changes. And so again, making it like a visual thing as well for both students and educators. And it makes our lives easier as educators, but it's also another skill for students to highlight, right? And then they're also seeing like, oh, I highlighted the entire thing. So I changed the whole thing. That may be the case, but a lot of the times it's not, right? And so, oh my gosh. Yeah. Lots of ownership of learning here too. Cause like, I'm not telling you what to do at this particular moment. I'm actually just saying like, hey, we're going to learn these lessons. You're going to learn it at your own pace. And then we're going to chunk it and scaffold it so that it is more accessible for you and also for me to assess.
Oh, that's awesome. I like the way that you have engaged with the students so well, and then they get to improve over time, and you don't mark as much, but you do guide them still. Yeah, so that's really an interesting approach. I'm slowly buying into this. Yeah, so yeah, slowly I'm buying into this.
Slowly.
Yeah.
That's all we want. Slowly. We don't want you to do it fast, right? Like slowly is good.
Yeah,
Toni
slowly.
Rose, I love that you added in that highlighting step as well. That's not something I ever thought about, but also when
I'm gonna do that.
Yeah, and when I was doing essays with self-pacing, I also like just chunked them massively. I actually was doing like your thesis statement was one of the mastery checks. Your topic sentences was one of the mastery checks. So it was sort of that same like level of chunking. Like they couldn't move through their process without the previous step being completed and being mastered. And then they were revising on the spot. So nice and easy. And when you get that final essay, you really are mostly just reading it for grammar and structure and organization more than anything, because you've pretty much already approved every aspect of the paper. It cut grading down more than half.
So much.
Cool.
And students get that real-time feedback right away.
Yep.
And they don't have to wait for 2 weeks for Ms. D to like figure out their life to get some grades and feedback done.
Yeah, that's always the important thing, the wait time. And I realized when I went for a course on giving feedback, what I learned was that the best feedback is always the most immediate or the fastest feedback you can give. Because if you're too slow in giving feedback, students forget what they've done. And most important thing, they forget the challenges that they face doing that task.
Yep.
So by the time you give the task back, the work back, all they are interested in is the grade. Oh, I got a B or I got an A. And they don't care about your feedback because they can't even remember what I did 2 weeks ago. I don't remember what I did yesterday. So yeah, that's something that's very, very crucial. But my favorite question, because, I'm an AI person and, new things are always teachers are very resistant to new things because we've been doing things the traditional way. Some of them have been doing it for 20, 30 years. So what are some of the challenges you face in implementing this self-pacing methodology? And how do you address the challenges or concerns that teachers may have when they transit to a self-pacing approach?
Oh my gosh. I feel like, Dustin, you could also talk about this too, right? Because of all the
talk all day about
educators.
this. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think for me, like the challenge is really the teacher mindset, honestly. That is a huge thing, because this is something that I say all the time too, is like your students know when you actually believe that they can do something. And if you automatically in your head say, oh, my students cannot do this, they will not do it. Right. So when we think about it, it's scary, again, to relinquish control. Right. It's scary to be like, oh, snap, wait a minute, I'm not going to talk at students anymore for 20 to 30 minutes. What do you mean? Right. And so that's scary. And that's rightfully so. It's valid. It's valid to be scared because it's not what we're used to doing. Right. And so some of the challenges that I've been faced when I've been having lots of conversations with teachers is, again, those misconceptions of like, oh, we just let them go. And it's like, no. You have to create guardrails for them. Right. But when it comes to students, the biggest challenge for students is the learned helplessness that they have, right? Because I think in the US, because I know, Ghazali, you're in Singapore, right? I don't know how it is in Singapore, but in the US, I know definitely there's a lot of learned helplessness with our kids. And it's not their fault completely. It's also kind of our fault as well as educators, because we don't have the time to give them to process what it is that they're learning, right? Because we're always on the go. So maybe it's not even the educators, maybe it's the school system and the structure itself of just like, go. You have 60 minutes, you got to learn all of this in 60 minutes, and then you got to go. And so I think with our students, when you say, okay, it's self-paced, our students just know that if they ask a question and if they ask it enough, they're going to get the answer, right? Yeah. And so they don't actually have the desire to find out on their own because they've never been challenged in that way, because they know like they just got to go, right? Like, oh, well, like if you don't get it, that sucks. We're going to keep moving. And so I think with students is the learned helplessness. And I know one of the comments that I got from my 6th graders when we started self-pacing was like, oh man, you mean to tell me that I can't slack off like I did last year? You mean to tell me I actually need to know this stuff? And
yes,
so
you do.
Yeah, that's the shift, right? Because our students are just used to, again, us rushing their learning and not having the opportunity to reassess and revise. So to have self-pacing and be like, wait a minute, you mean to tell me that I am now responsible and accountable for my own learning, and that you're providing me everything I actually need to figure out the problem or the task? Like, that's new. So you're going to get a lot of resistance from students, especially if you implement this model in high school. I mean, their schooling experience has been traditional way of teaching and learning. And so you'll get resistance from students because they just don't know what it means to have autonomy. They don't know what it means to have the freedom to actually learn the way that they do. And I know one of the things too that students really enjoy about this model is that they learn what type of learner they are, right? Like they can now be advocates for themselves, and they can speak up and say, I don't understand this, or I need to pause and figure it out, or even better, who in my class can I go to for help? Because the teacher's not available right now. They're working with someone else. And so instead of me waiting, I can actually go look at our pacing tracker and see like, oh, this classmate is already on this lesson. They've already mastered it. So I'm going to go to them and ask for help there. So then you create this community of learning in your classroom when it comes to self-pacing. Dustin, I think you can probably talk about this too, is like, you know, one thing that educators ask all the time is like, well, if it's self-pacing, how do you do grouping? Right? Yep. You want to speak on that, Dustin?
Yeah, I mean, I often say like one of the best things about self-pacing is that you don't really have to do grouping anymore if you don't want to. The grouping that you're going to do as a teacher in this model is to pull a small group of kids to you so that you can work with that small group. But by using a progress tracker, we teach our students I taught my students to use that tracker, like Toni Rose was saying, to know who they should and could collaborate with. So they look at it and they say, oh, I see that these kids are on the same lesson as me. We're in the same spot. We're going to get together. We're going to watch our instructional video together. We're going to do our practice work together. And it's a fully collaborative learning experience. And the only time they're really not collaborating is when they're doing their independent mastery checks. And then the same thing, I'm struggling. And I used to use a 3 before me technique. So you have to ask 3 peers a question that you have to try to figure it out before you can come and ask me. And if they're then coming to me, I actually now have 4 students that I can then work with to solve this problem with 4 kids at once, instead of with this kid here and then across the room going and solving that same problem with another kid, etc. Right? So it really brought that collaboration together. And that to me was one of the most powerful pieces. And like kids all the time are like, wait, you mean I can do this work with my friends? Yeah, you can. Because you know what? That's the real world. Like the real world, we aren't just like in these isolated boxes where we're just like trying to figure everything out for ourselves. If we need something, we look it up. We go talk to somebody, you know, we, as teachers, we go to the teacher next door or down the hall. Like we don't work in isolation. So why we try to make our students work in isolation is really beyond me.
And something I'm hearing too is that there's less work on us, right? On like creating those grouping. It just like naturally happens for students to collaborate with one another. One thing that I really do want to hone in too, Dustin, is like a concern that we have is like the progress trackers, but aren't students going to make fun of each other if they're behind pace? And it's like, no, I think it's the culture that you create as well. Like in the beginning, when you're introducing the pacing tracker, you're going to say already, like in the most positive and greatest way too, like, hey, I believe that you all can do this. And I wholeheartedly do believe that y'all can do this. And this is a way for us to collaborate with one another. What it is not going to do is blank, 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 right? So like in the beginning of the school year, when I implemented the model, I told my students, it's not a way for us to like make fun of each other. That's not going to happen. It's not a way for us to talk negatively about each other, right? Because it's real life that people are in different paces. And so we utilize it as a celebration. This is a way to celebrate each other. And also acknowledging the fact that some of our peers are going to need extra help. And that is okay, because you may be good at theme right now, but then you may not be good at creating thesis statements. So don't assume that you're going to be great at everything. And the same thing with their peers as well, right? So we really have that open communication and conversation with each other as an educator and students of like what the expectations are when it comes to the progress tracker, because I know sometimes our educators are really hesitant about it, and rightfully so, right? And again, like, you know, if you have positive intent and you assume that your students are going to do well, they really do show up and they are just amazing. Like students are so great. When they know that you believe in them, they will not disappoint you.
Yeah. I think the other thing that teachers get weary about when it comes to the progress tracker is like, if that's going to display student grades, and it doesn't. It just simply displays whether they mastered something, are doing something, are behind on something, are revising something, and that's it, right? Like it doesn't say that so-and-so got an 85% on such assignment. It just says that they mastered it. And so that's something else that I think is really great. And then the culture, my students, like when kids start to get behind, they push each other. Like there's so less, especially at the high school level, there was so less of me being like, hey, like, let's go, like, let's get it together, right? And instead it was peers going up to each other and saying, do you need help with something? Because you're like 3 lessons behind. And kids often just even get embarrassed about the fact that like they're 3 or 4 lessons behind where pretty much everybody else is. So it becomes, in the right culture, if you create it, it becomes this like really wonderful scenario where kids are pushing each other instead of the teacher pushing kids.
Yeah, it's so much fun. It's so much fun to hear students be like, hey, Ms. D, I'm ahead of pace. So instead of doing the should do or the aspire to do, I'm going to go help Josh because it seems like Josh needs my help. And another thing too that I want to say is that that's a skill that we need to teach our kids too, right? Like we can't just assume that our students know how to be a student teacher, because what I realized from my teaching experience is that my students like to tell each other the answers, and then there's really no guidance. And so I had to take a step back and be like, whoa, wait a minute. That's not how we do it, right? Like here is actually how you help guide a peer through the task and the skills that we're learning. And so that was a whole lesson for my students, because I think as educators, we just assume that our students know how to help each other. And then they do help each other by giving each other answers, but no conversations. And so again, just like reiterating the fact that like this is probably a skill that our students, even in high school, even in college, may need, because these are skills that we haven't covered.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. This is so good. Tell us, let's take a little different perspective here and tell us a little bit about how school leaders and administrators can support teachers in implementing and sustaining this type of a model, because I think we're talking about challenges, and that's a whole challenge all in itself, is like getting admin on board, getting school leaders on board with this type of change, because school leaders are also scared of change, even post-pandemic. So many went right back to doing things the way that they were doing things before COVID, and like, we can't do school that way. It does not work. So I think that's just another challenge that teachers face. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and that's really valid, right? Because our school leaders, again, they are handling so many things that we don't even see as educators. And so one of the things that I would highly recommend for school leaders to do is to either really make time to observe the teachers who are trying to implement a self-paced, and having conversations about like, hey, show me how this works. How does this work, right? We're like coming in there with curiosity, rather than like, oh, this is the worst thing ever, right? I think giving our educators, again, autonomy, and inviting them to be innovative, honestly, right? And then to give them time to innovate. That is another really interesting thing too. I know here at Modern Classroom, if you go through our free course or our virtual mentorship program, we do have a pathway for school leaders as well. For instructional coaches, we have superintendents taking our courses. We have district leaders taking our courses, just so that they have a better understanding of what self-pacing means. Because I guarantee you that like, they're just like educators, right? They've heard of this phrase before, but they don't actually know how to implement it. And we also saw that there was a gap in that too. So Modern Classroom is actually doing a whole supportive group specifically for school leaders. So we have a leadership collaborative where we have principals and district leaders and superintendents sharing their stories of how they implemented a model. And another thing too is like, you know, as educators, we don't like it when we're forced to do something, right? So making it really optional of like, hey, there's this really great tool. I know that we're focusing on UDL, or we're focusing on culturally responsive teaching, and here's a model that can help you implement that. And so let's have a cohort of teachers who are interested. And then you as a school leader can do that, the course with the teachers, and really just putting in that time to support the teachers as well. Something that I've seen as well is like, there's compensation involved with educators who want to implement the model, right? Because it does take a lot of time to put together a self-paced model. Front loading, it's the same amount of time if you're not doing self-paced. In my opinion, I will argue that it is the exact same time that you're doing. It just so happens that in this case it's front loading, like you actually have to know what you're doing before the unit starts. And so a lot of the times there's school leaders who are really into creating a self-paced learning environment. They provide planning periods for our teachers to work collaboratively together, right? And so what that means, and you know, a thing that I would also really highlight and suggest is like, get 2 fifth graders to go through this model. So then they have each other as thought partners, as you know, just someone to have conversations with, or to share ideas and things that they've done in the classroom as well. And so I know that school leaders have a lot on their plate. And I also think that when we make time, because we have to make time, we're never going to get more time, right? We have to make time for the things that matter, and really taking a step back and saying like, hey, you know what, like we have a lot of students who are absent. What can we do? We have a lot of students who are below grade level. What do we do? What is the instructional model? Because clearly the traditional way of teaching and learning is not helping, and that's how it's been for hundreds of years. And so we really need to disrupt that. And that's scary, and that's okay. Let's acknowledge that. That's scary, and we're here to support you.
Yep.
Wow, that's really very, very awesome. And you have the resources already made, I hear, and it's created by your community. Wow,
Yes.
that's something that the kind of support that you get is amazing. And this is also one of the things that I think will help to get teachers on board. Yeah. So moving on to students, what interventions are in place to ensure that all students can thrive in a self-paced learning environment? Because some things sometimes the phrase students left behind or learning gap, and all these things come into play. So how does this approach help to solve those issues?
Oh my gosh, we're always going to have issues, right? Always going to have issues. That is like something that will happen forever and ever and ever. And I think that our model really helps alleviate stress from both educators and students. So remember when I was saying, like, when students are absent, it's just kind of like, oh, well, that sucks. You're absent. You just got to catch up on your own because I don't have the time and energy to do that. But with self-pacing, because you've already recorded your instructional videos, right? And students can access this wherever. They can access it at home. I had a student who didn't come to school because they had a dentist appointment. So they watched the instructional videos and did their lessons at the dentist office while they were waiting for their appointment. And I've had stories of high school students who have a job right after school, and they, in their downtime, they're listening to the instructional videos. Another thing that I really love about the instructional videos is that our families have access to what kids are learning now. You know how there's like lots of memes about like, oh my gosh, if my child goes and comes home with a math homework, I don't know how I'm going to support them. But with the instructional videos, it's there so they can actually learn alongside their student. And so, and self-pacing happens because of the instructional videos that students can play, replay, pause. I'm going to go take a break right now, come right back to it. So that it doesn't, it's not a one-time thing, right? Especially when it comes to lectures, it's a one-time thing. And I taught students with IEPs, with 504s, who are language learners, who had a lot of, behavior challenges as well, because life is lifing. With self-pacing, it allows them to get their lives together, right? And it doesn't impact anyone else. If I have a student who is having a bad day and they want to be disruptive for whatever reason, there's space for that, right? And then the other students can actually continue learning. And so, and when we think about students with ADHD, I have ADHD. And so I understand the need for pauses, for like, let me take a break right now. I cannot function. I got to go take a break. And that's okay. It doesn't interrupt me. If I am doing a lecture, I would be so frustrated. I'd be like, no, you got to sit here. You have to listen to me. But with self-pacing, it's like, no, okay, take that break. I'll see you in 2 minutes. Go walk down the hall, come right back, and then pick up where pick up where you left off. And I think that itself is beautiful. My students who have IEPs, right, where they're either like struggling with reading or struggling with writing or whatever it is, because it is self-paced, they don't have the need to rush. They don't feel pressured to perform at the same exact time that their peers are performing. And so then again, it alleviates the stress, right? With self-pacing, there's no element of surprise in their learning experience anymore. It's not like oh, well, here's a test that you didn't know about. Because with self-pacing, you have the progress tracker. It tells you exactly how many lessons you have, what the mastery checks are, and what the summative assessment is. All of that is transparent. All of that is clear. If parents and caregivers and co-teachers and admin want to take a look at what you're doing, they can. There's no secret. There's no element of surprise, and everyone is on the same page, which I think is really great. Another thing too is that I can save my energy throughout the entire day, right? Because sometimes my energy is spent after second period and I have 8 periods because I'm just like lecturing, correcting, managing, all of that. With self-pacing, our students actually just manage themselves. And so then I'm really focusing on creating relationships with students and also getting them to be where they need to be, right? It's really funny because when I first started implementing the model and my students got it within like 2-3 weeks because we had really clear direction, and I had 3 other teachers that were doing this with me. So it was a team effort. And I just sat back and I was like, wow, they don't need me anymore. I'm bored. Like, what am I going to do? And so then I understood with like the self-pacing that I can go and have a conversation with a student about whatever story I want to share, and it doesn't impact anyone else, right? If a student wants to talk to me about real estate, okay, let's take 30 seconds or a minute or even 5 minutes to talk about real estate, but everyone else is learning, right? So it really does open up this space to be humans in the classroom, because we can't, I know that there's like this whole expectation that students need to be engaged 100% of the time. Y'all, like as adults, we're not even engaged 100% of the time. So in reality, like that's not sustainable. It's so unreal. And so when I started, again, self-pacing, I was bored. So I started messing with the kids. And then Kareem came in, Dustin, and Kareem was like, no, you got to actually be more intentional, like create small groups and have those small groups with students. And I was like, oh, okay, you're right. Let me work with the small group of students today, and then I'll work with another group tomorrow. So it was an adjustment for me as well. But yeah, I mean, work-life balance has gotten better. My joy of teaching has returned. My students had great questions that they were asking, and a lot of the skills were like just showing up in so many ways. And it was just a lot of celebrations. I mean, yeah, there were challenges, but I feel like there were a lot more celebrations than anything, because we were getting to know who we were as human beings and as learners.
You know, you touched also on just like the kids with IEPs and just different ways that this supports. One of the things that has been more apparent to me than ever is dealing with absences. And especially right now, like absences are just off the chain. But when you have students who are returning and you have like 5 kids all return from being absent on the same day, but 2 of them have been gone for over a week, and 2 of them have just been gone for a couple days, and one of them was just gone for 1 day. You're trying to catch all these kids up on all the different things that they missed and try to move all the rest of your students forward at the same time. And that, to me, as in the traditional model, was very, very frustrating. And now I don't have to worry about any of that, right? Like I can meet with each of those kids independently. I can pull all 5 of them together into one group. And the fact is, they're just picking up where they last left off. And so like a lot of times they don't even need me. Like I'll just check in with them just to be like, you know where you're at, right? Like, you know what you need to do, right? Do you need any help from me? And then they're gone, right? And I've had kids come to me and say, after being out for 2 weeks, say, Mr. T, like your class is the easiest one for me to get caught back up in. I don't know what I'm doing in these other classes, and it's overwhelming. And then because it's overwhelming in all the rest of their classes, they take another week off of school. So to me, that's another reason why this model is so impactful in helping students just kind of across the board. But then also, yeah, 100% way better balance for me once I started implementing this. I mean, it took a little bit because of all the front loading that you do to do all that planning. But once that's done, it's done. Once you have videos on skills, you have videos on skills, and there's no replanning that. And so it absolutely like opens your life back up. So
yeah. And I was going to say too, like when we think about absences, it's not just like life is lifing, but it could be for student athletes too, right? Or like, you know what, they need to be pulled out for OT. They need to be pulled out for therapy. They need to be pulled out for whatever reason. And so whatever those interruptions are, there's actually no interruptions because they can pick this up right away.
Yep.
Another thing that I've heard too is that some students will say, I learned better at night, late at night. And so they can then go back to these videos and really relearn it however they need to, because they have access to it. If they don't understand something, they can just go back and do it. I mean, you know, we have competition with TikTok and YouTube videos, right? And so this is just a really another way to enhance their learning too, of like, okay, I love this. So it's kind of getting them to be more self-directed and to not lean on the teachers as much. And that to me is really exciting, because I know I've spoken to a student athlete and she was saying, like you said, right, I was really overwhelmed. I didn't want to miss any more classes because I was running or playing volleyball. But with this model, I was able to say, like, oh, I really needed to be better with time management, first of all. So then you get this executive functioning skills, time management, prioritizing, figuring out a way to communicate with each other. And so it just, I don't know, it just opens up a whole new world for both educators and students. And I can't say enough good things about it.
Yep. You know, I think too about missing like one period of the day because an assembly happened or something like that. And in a traditional teaching, that throws off everything, because if you're trying to keep all your classes like on the same place, in the same place and on the same pace, and all of a sudden just one class is going to miss instruction for a day, a lot of times that's the day that people will just mail it in and be like, well, we're going to miss one class, we might as well miss all classes, right? And now you don't ever have to worry about that. It doesn't matter that just one period got missed for the day because of an assembly or a fire drill or something like that, right? So
yeah, good for pointing out the fire drills, because those fire drills, man, they really do take up so much time. And another thing too that I wanted to point out is that not only can students be absent, teachers can also be absent, and the learning continues. Like when I tell you, when I started implementing self-paced models, our subs loved our classes. Like, hey, let me just go to your class. Like, I loved it. It ran itself. I didn't have to like really do much. Students knew exactly what to do. And so I took advantage. I was like, oh, well, let me go to this conference. Let me go to that conference. I'm going to go on vacation in October. I'm going to do like, I was out a lot. And my kids would just like text me and be like, Missy, like, you're gone again. And I'm like, yeah, but you're still learning, right? And they're like, yeah, but like, why are you not here? And you know, so it's just like this whole concept of like, there's a lot more freedom as well. It's not so stressful to be out anymore, because I know sometimes teachers would rather be at school when they're sick and they're not feeling well, because they just don't want to have to deal with sub lesson plans or like creating a whole new thing for lessons to happen. And then knowing that that's not going to happen anyway. And so with modern classroom, it's really seamless. Like if you need to be gone for a week because you're having to deal with life, it's okay as well. I've had teachers who've gone through like maternity leave, and they're like, oh yeah, I had the model. Students just kind of knew what to do. Like, yeah, it's still kind of a struggle for the sub because of whatever reason, right? But for the most part, learning is still happening.
Yeah, my sub plans were super minimal for the first time ever. And a lot of times I would just leave something that said like, for this period, talk to such and such student. They'll tell you what's up.
Yes. I love that part too. Cause then I'd be like, hey, I'd have a conference with the student and I'd be like, hey, you're like my student teacher. And like, I know that you can like do all these things. And then, they're just like, oh, wait a minute now. Like I'm this thing. Okay. And so it's so beautiful. And then I visited, I get to actually visit schools all across the country to check out like different educators who are implementing our model. And there was one teacher who signed up to be observed. And then he was like, actually, I'm not going to be there, but a sub will be there. I think it'll be really great for y'all to go in there anyway, just to see how it's going. And the sub was just glowing. Like, oh my gosh, the students know what to do. They're telling me what they're learning about. They're checking in with me. Like, I don't have to tell them what to do. And she's like, I'm living the life. Like, this is how it should be, subbing. And I was like, yeah, it's pretty cool, right?
And you don't come back to nothing being done either, right? Like that's always the worst part about being gone, is then not only setting up for it, but then getting back and having none of that executed. You don't have to worry about any of that with this model. So
yeah. So it's like, it's not that just the students are behind, you're also behind in your curriculum.
Yep. Well, this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much. Is there anything we missed? Any final words, anything you'd like to share, or final discussion things around MCP or self-pacing? anything we haven't covered that you would want to highlight before we get out of here?
Yeah, I just want to say that all of this sounds good, right? All of it sounds good. And it is going to be, you're going to need multiple reiterations for your own self-paced classroom. So it's not like one right way to do it. There are multiple right ways to do it. And so just learning with community, being in community and asking all the questions and really being an advocate for yourself is really, really, really important. Mind you now, right? Like you are not the first person to implement this. So make sure to reach out to our community. And so, and I'll share that link with Dustin as well of our Facebook group if you want to join. We do have implementer meetups, so it's all virtual where folks from all over the world come in and just have conversations about their challenges and celebrations when implementing the model. Another thing too is that we have scholarships for a virtual mentorship program. The difference between our free course and our virtual mentorship program is that you actually get to be paired with a mentor. And so what that means is, I know you all have heard of dating apps like Tinder and OkCupid. That's kind of how we match you with your mentor. Depending on your content, your grade level, the tech tools that you're using, we really do try to pair you up with the best mentor to support you in implementing this model. And so our virtual mentorship program, we have scholarships for that as well. If you're in the US, we have different regions that have scholarships that will even pay you $500 for completing the course. And then of course, like for our more international educators, we have, I think it's like the Classroom Innovation Scholarship, where if you just apply for it, you'll be on a wait list. But for the most part, we clear out that wait list because again, we don't want you to have to pay for anything. We want you to access all the resources and all the support that you need for free. That's why we have our scholarships. And so we have our podcast, if you like listening, we have our social media, if you're on social media. So we really try to think about the different ways that people learn, just so that we can make it more accessible for you all. But yeah, I'll definitely share the scholarship link. I'll share the Facebook group as well, where all of our events and our webinars and workshops and panels and all the cool things are happening. But yeah, I think I did a pretty good job of wrapping up like all the things modern classroom, right, Dustin? Am I missing anything?
I'm only going to name one thing that you missed, but I think it's only because it's pretty brand new. We actually just launched MCPU, our Modern Classroom Project University, which are all self-paced courses designed by teachers for teachers. So for example, I was part of creating a whole course on how you do and how you run a self-paced English language arts classroom. I'm one of like 4 teachers whose like videos are in this course. And so that's another resource that MCP offers that's just super cool. And we just launched it. So
yes, Dustin, I'm laughing because I know MCP is like, TR, what? You forgot about MCPU? But you're right. MCP University is there and you have access after you take the free course, I believe. Yep. So like you got to do the free course and then you'll have access to deepen your learning. So it's not just one of those things where you have access to it right away, but you do want the basic foundations of self-paced, mastery-based, and blended learning to be able to access the rest of the resources that we have for you.
Mm-hmm. And then I think too, the other thing I just love about the mentorship program, Ghazali, is the mentors are just teachers. In fact, you can't even be a mentor if you aren't a teacher. So everybody who's doing this it's a great, when you go through the program, you can become a distinguished modern classroom educator, and then you can become one of our mentors. And it's a nice little side hustle.
Yeah. Dustin, you don't need me here.
Look, I'm the guest on the next episode to talk about, how we do that in the secondary, how it looks very specifically. So I was trying to keep my mouth shut a little bit. So I don't want to repeat 2 episodes in a row.
No, that's beautiful. I mean, thank you. Again, you're reminding us of the teacher leader pathways as well, right? A lot of the times our teachers are presenting in conferences. They are presenting in their district-led conferences. They're doing, they're getting published, writing articles for us. And so there's really ways to elevate your leadership skills as well when you join our community. Another thing too is that we have a Shades of Excellence Alliance group specifically for educators of color that you could just be in community with other educators of color from all over the world. I mean, like we've had people join from Egypt, from Nigeria, from like just Thailand even. Like it's really, really dope to see people just be in community together. So again, like I do community engagement, right? So I'm all about creating community just so that you feel supported, you feel loved and nurtured, because again, we're not going to do things in isolation anymore.
Yeah. Ghazali, any final words from you, sir?
Well, I just love the inclusivity of all this. I can feel the love, I can feel the love. Yes. So I encourage everybody to come on board and try it out. I mean, it's free. So, and you're learning something that you can actually apply, and it's very useful. Try it out. You never know. This could be the thing that turns your teaching career around. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, one last thing, Ghazali, if you don't mind, we have our virtual mentorship program starting for the summer. It's what our first cohort starts on May 20th. So if you fill out that application for the scholarship, you may be even getting into our summer virtual mentorship program for free. And then you get to experience it in the summer while you're not teaching, and really just kind of process and reflect and dive into all of the information that you're going to be learning.
This has been so great. Toni Rose, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Everybody listening, thank you for listening. Do not forget to subscribe and rate and share the Teachers Talking podcast so that we can continue to reach educators all around the world, which is what we love to do. Our next episode will be out on May 20th. So Ghazali, Toni Rose, thank you. Listeners, thank you, and have a good one.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
Bye, everybody.